Love is always a desire, but not every desire is love. John Galliano's attitude to the woman has much more to do with desire than with love. His vision of the feminine corresponds to the sexual paradigm that appeared on the threshold of modernism at the turn of the 19th century, during the period that came to be known as la fin du siècle. It was, to some extent, the femininity of men projected into the theatrical mirror of the woman, shaping her as an ideal figure in his likeness. The point was no longer, as in the aristocratic or courtly figure of seduction, to conquer woman, to seduce her or to be seduced by her, but to produce her as a realized utopia, an ideal woman or femme fatale, a supranatural metaphor. The perception of the woman as an artificial object or a work of art dominates the cultural scene at this turn of the century. In 1895, in his play The Ideal Husband, Oscar Wilde portrayed rather mischievous Mrs. Chively as a work of art on the whole, but showing the influence of too many schools. "I want to be a living work of art," claimed Marquise Luisa Casati Stampa, one of Galliano's favorite muses. She spent her life and her vast fortune on immortalizing her masterpiece in every possible artistic style. She commissioned portraits from Giovanni Baldini, Augustus John, Kees van Dongen, Tommaso Marinetti, Fortunato Depera, Giacomo Balla, and many, many others. Man Ray and Cecil Beaton photographed her as a divine seductress. One of the pictures features her with two pairs of eyes, one to see and another to be seen. When not posing for artists, she staged extravagant balls in Venice and Paris, calling photographers to capture these ephemeral spectacles for eternity. Her elaborate costumes were designed by Worth, Poiret, Erte, Fortuny, and Bakst. She lived up to the lines that Shakespeare dedicated to Cleopatra, which are engraved on her tombstone. "Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety." The nascent art of cinema contributed to feminine objectification, creating movie icons. Marlene Dietrich, who happened to be a Dior client during his lifetime, is another muse to whom Galliano dedicated a collection and a product line. In his mythologies, Roland Barthes describes the face of Greta Garbo, but the same pertains to Marlene Dietrich. It is a wonderful face as object. The star's makeup has the snowy density of a mask. Flesh develops certain mystical sentiment of perdition. She spent the final 13 years of her life enclosed in her apartment to hide the disturbing maturation of her beauty. During Galliano's period, models' faces in advertising images are so airbrushed that they attain mask-like perfection. Galliano was fond of masks and was inspired by historic periods when they were popular: ancient Egypt, the Elizabethan era, Japan and Kabuki theater, silent movies, and the 18th century royal court at Versailles. Out of Dior's exalted triumvirate of female collaborators, Galliano was inspired by Mitza Pricard, who, according to Christian Dior, was one of those people who made elegance their sole raison d'être. She was superbly indifferent to such mundane concerns as politics, finance, or social change. This period is important for fashion, since it is during this time that emerged the society of spectacle, and clothes acquired some metaphysical meaning. Baudelaire, this dandy of decadence, in his Painter of the Modern Life writes, "What poet would dare, in the depiction of pleasure caused by the apparition of beauty, separate the woman from her dress? The woman and her dress form the general harmony." Yet, in his haute couture collections, Galiano uncovers the work in progress, the creation of this artifact, showing its inner structure, the sartorial devices, and the manufacturer's stamp. Already in 1997, in his biography of John Galliano, Colin McDowell observed that his collections brought echoes of hookahs, geishas, hostesses to opium dance.
I used to have this girlfriend known as Elsie, with whom I shared 4 sordid rooms in Chelsea. She wasn't what you'd call a blushing flower. As a matter of fact, she rented by the hour.
John, we are told, loves women, but it is not easy to avoid the thought that within that loves lurks a fear which must be laid to rest by pastiche, or even more compelling, the suspicion that it is a love so intense it also encompasses a degree of hatred. Love is incompatible with hatred, but it is a frequent counterpart of frustrated desire. Today, we will expose the inner springs animating the machinery of desire and seduction, using the theories developed by Jacques Lacan and Jean Baudrillard. La femme fatale is never fatal as a natural element, but as a projective artifact of male hysteria. She is a pure appearance, an artificial construct with which to trap the desires of others. Hence, the mirror acquires a new meaning. To seduce is to die as reality and to reconstitute oneself as illusion. "I'll be your mirror" does not mean "I'll be your reflection," but "I'll be your deception." If the real woman disappears in this configuration, the masculine desire becomes problematic as well, because it projects itself upon its own image. Louis Aragon dedicated to this game of mirrors these beautiful lines. "Turning towards me, you can find on the wall of my gaze your dreamt-of shadow. I'm that wretch, comparable to mirrors that can reflect, but cannot see. Like them, my eye is empty, and like them, inhabited by your absence that makes them blind." The mirror reflects the narcissistic, autoerotic self-sufficiency. If courtly love inspired Christian Dior like Dante and Goethe before him to sublimate the woman to the agency of salvation, a different interpretation of this phenomenon applies to John Galliano. In his essay on courtly love, Slavoj Žižek describes it as masochistic theater. He explains that the lady takes on the value of representing the thing, the Freudian das Ding. She becomes the stand-in for it. Das Ding, or it, is very difficult to define, but it can be compared to the almighty, remote, pre-Christian God, or to fate, someone or something that we have no control over. No empathetic relationship is possible with it. Lacan calls it the real, which is the primordial state of affairs and which is unknowable, but men constantly create myths to cope with it in the symbolic and the imaginary orders. During this period of la fin du siècle, all the awesome aspects of the real, of it, of fatum, were projected upon the woman, turning the lady of courtly love into la femme fatale. Why this happened at this precise moment in Occidental history is outside the scope of this discussion. But if I were to give a single reason, I would quote Nietzsche, who died exactly at the turn of the century in 1900, who largely predefined the following century, and who, in 1888, proclaimed, "God is dead, we have killed him." The word religion arguably stems from the Latin verb religare, meaning to tie, to bond, to connect. So the man loses his sense of connection to the one stupendous whole whose body nature is, and God the soul. Since God is dead, man is faced with a soulless nature whose features he traditionally projects upon the woman. Dangerous Cleopatras, murderous Judiths, and treacherous Delilahs engulfed theater stages and movie screens, appeared in poems and on canvases. Among these, the figure of Salome was most prominent. This cultural phenomenon became known as Salomania. Huysmans referred to her as indifferent, irresponsible, and insensible. Mallarmé described her as being inscrutable. Sensuality divorced from love and tenderness becomes sinful. Stuck's 1889 painting, Sensuality, evolved into a series of 12 almost identical canvases named Scene, which inspired one of the hypnotic poison advertisement campaigns. If at the time of Dior we saw a lot of references to Mary, during this period Eve and her attributes dominate the imagery of the brand. It is tempting and partially legitimate to see the woman as a fetish of masculine desire and a victim of misogyny. But rather, both of them, man and woman, become mere actors in the interplay of archetypal forces and compulsive urges erupting from the unconscious. Both face dramatic denouement and a tragic end. Behind this demonization of the woman lurks suffering from the impossibility to recover the lost object, the memory of which stems from the mystical union with the mother, from this primary symbiotic relationship which once procured the feeling of omnipotence, invincibility, and invulnerability. Growing up, falling into language and social norms, human individual supposedly loses access to an immediate and undiluted jouissance of being, loses access to satisfaction in its raw and unmitigated intensities. Therefore, he looks for its substitutes. However, they are always and necessarily inadequate due to the insurmountable gap between the ideal object originating in the subject's unconscious past and the real object incarnating it. This leads to constant alternation of idealization and devaluation. The charge of both poles of the feminine, positive and negative, strengthens, and the tension between them increases. Binary oppositions between angel and beast, master and slave, royalty and pariah, everlasting life and eternal death, hero and hooligan, respectable woman and slut become extreme. Desire, refracted through a series of false reflections, constantly comes back and nourishes dissatisfaction, thereby transforming itself into a frenetic and insatiable drive that came to be known as the death drive. This drive will allow no halting at any attainable position and provokes tension that can only be relieved through transgressive acts. This subtle ambiguity and versatility are lost. The reconciliation of opposites, which was so important to Christian Dior and to the whole European classical tradition, is annihilated. And this ever-increasing polarization results in rupture, disintegration, and explosion. From a magic potion or a cure, poison becomes an unambiguously deadly substance. The commercial with Eva Green evokes another etymological link for Venus, which is venom.
Midnight Poison par Christian Dior.
Ecstasy turns into uncontrolled frenzy, leading not to illumination, but through disintegration to addiction and entrapment. These product names become part of the brand's vocabulary. Traditional Dior's sartorial elements that Galliano mastered with unparalleled virtuosity acquire inverse meaning. The wings are directed downwards. The whirling folds of fabric seem to drag the woman down rather than to lift her up. In advertising imagery, models' limbs hang lifelessly. The woman is portrayed in semi-conscious, intoxicated condition. Jacques Lacan, an irrefutable authority on desire, famously said, "Only love can make jouissance condescend to desire." Jouissance, which in an adult is not distilled or sublimated into love, returns only in the guises of what might be labeled limit experiences, encounters with which are traumatic, overwhelming, and unbearable. In his Seminar 11, Jacques Lacan explains, "I love you, but since in you, unexplainably, I love something more than you, the objet petit a, I hurt you." This situation may give rise to crimes of passion, which often featured in the artwork of the time, but occasionally encroached upon artists' lives. The painter Walter Sickert, the British Degas who captured late Victorian world of music halls, shadowy interiors, and unvarnished nudity, arguably turned out to be Jack the Ripper himself. Edvard Munch had tumultuous relationships with women and was even wounded by his lover when he tried to prevent her from committing a suicide. Oscar Wilde, this embodiment of aristocratic nonchalance, this paragon of literary and sartorial style, perished prematurely in prison, exile, and poverty. These examples could be multiplied further. Tension and unrest permeate many Galliano creations, but they were particularly salient in the 2006 Autumn-Winter Haute Couture collection that Vogue described as a blood and gore-spotted drama, and where models came out with their crucifix-festooned necks, with the date of the French Revolution and where Galliano himself appeared swinging a rapier. The alter ego of Galliano in poetry is Baudelaire. In his works, Eros is always shadowed by Thanatos. Baudelaire's poem Madonna seems to provide a transcript for Galliano's 2006 collection. It starts with a beautiful and poignant vow of his love for Madonna. He wants to erect a glittering shrine for her and decorate it with the pearls of his tears and pave its floors with his sorrows. But the last 10 lines are as follows. In fine, your role of merit to perfect and mingle barbarism with respect, of 7 deadly scenes of black delight, remorseful torturer, to show my slight, I'll forge and sharpen 7 deadly swords, and like a callous juggler on the boards, taking it for my target, I would dart them deep into your streaming, sobbing heart. The woman unwillingly becomes the martyr of the death drive. A different poem, Martyr, starts in a typical Baudelaire-Galliano way by an exquisite, if decadent description of an opulent room decorated with perfume flasks, sequined fabrics and voluptuous furniture, marble statues, pictures and perfumed dresses that trail in sumptuous folds. And then there is a violent twist in the story, and instead of the beautiful mistress among bouquets dying in their glass coffins, exhaling their last breath, there is a decapitated corpse of the woman. And the question that Baudelaire asks is very Lacanian. The vengeful man whose lust you couldn't sate, in spite of much love, nor quench his fire, did he on your dead flesh then consummate his monstrous last desire. Galliano's violent oscillations in and out of the snares of desire have produced some of the most admired masterpieces of couture. We will ever again fall under their spell, feel their charm, their temptation and allure, since they are testimonials to the irreconcilable drama inherent in human condition and in man as a subject of civilization and its discontents.